Hello everyone, my name is John Uhler. Welcome to Journey to Healing. We are doing a deep dive into the topic of boundaries. We've been expanding and expounding upon the issue of boundaries now for a number of weeks. Why is that? Because all of mental health issues essentially can be boiled down to two things. The issue of unresolved losses, usually then that are in the present and of course then that are in the past, and boundaries. That if you don't have a chance to resolve past losses, time does not heal all wounds. The more significant the loss, the greater the likelihood that you will carry that into the future. And then that will make it very difficult to be in the here and now, and that makes it very difficult to be able to discern the kind of relationships that you have, the kind of people that you have in front of you. And so you'll probably have a difficult time with boundaries. You'll probably go to one extreme or the other. And then that tends to cause issues in the here and now. So the current day stays stirred up. And so you never have a chance to go back and resolve the past. So we are looking at the issue of boundaries. Most people do not understand the topic. And in order to heal, it is crucial. If you are going to counseling, and you're not talking about your boundaries in the here and now, then it's time. Have your therapist do that, because that's all of life, quite frankly. But to the extent that you can have boundaries, have a voice, have your preference, then you will probably have pretty decent relationships. And of course, that also presupposes that you value other people and their preferences as well. If you'd like to catch up to where we're going to be jumping in right now, and that would be helpful because we've covered a lot, and there may be some topics that we cover right now as far as some of the graphics that you may not be familiar with. So I recommend you go to SurvivorSupport.net under the podcast tab, because we're talking about what makes for a healthy relationship versus what makes for an unhealthy or a dysfunctional relationship. And we were talking about, in previous relationships, the issue of everyone or each person carrying their own load. And I'm going to show you a good example, if I can find it, there we are, of what a load is. The old-fashioned definition of a load, it comes out of the Greek language, and that has to do with a knapsack. And what exactly is our responsibility? It is, of course, to pay the bills and to take care of responsibility, but to not do that is will stand out pretty quickly. So it really is found in Proverbs chapter 1 and chapter 2, 3,000 years old. It talks about doing what is right, just, and fair. That is different, as we saw last time, than let me bring it up here. Oh, I'm sorry. Oh, technologically, I'm doing really well. Sorry. Okay, maybe I have a burden. There we are. I'll get this down. So a burden is different than a load. A burden is something that life hands you that you don't have anything to do with, you didn't bring upon yourself, and you could not have reasonably predicted or protected yourself against that. Usually has to do with the loss of someone we care about. It has to do with living in a fallen world. That will hand too much to you. This man right there is dealing with something bigger than him. It is on him, meaning he has to own it. So this could be the death of a spouse. This could be the death of a child. This could be a natural disaster, something that he could not reasonably anticipate, though we are aware, of course, that we live in a fallen world. And that's where the burden comes in. So we are commanded to bear one another's burdens. If this man is trying to do this on his own, and he's trying to, let's get our little guy here, and he also is trying to do the right thing, there's our little load, you can imagine then the challenges he's going to have. It's too much for him. And so he will end up feeling like that guy. See, our little guy under a bunch of piles of rocks. But by that time, or as far as the piles on his back, he's probably dealing with let me see if I can coordinate this. He's probably really dealing with other people's irresponsibility. So we're using the idea of the knapsacks, and that is what constitutes a reasonable relationship. Two people doing what is right, just, and fair. But what happens if somebody chooses not to? What happens if someone chooses, let me see if I can get rid of that little guy. What happens if somebody starts to give over their responsibility? Well, they can end up looking like this. So now you have the beginnings of what we called an unreasonable relationship. If that starts, that begins a downward progression that we looked at, and I will find it here. That begins what we called it moves from a reasonable relationship. There's our little two knapsacks. It transitions to then an unreasonable and even an unhealthy relationship. I recommend, again, go into past podcasts. We deal with this. We've already walked ourselves through these different topics here. And then we left off with a toxic relationship, which is a very dangerous level. And you'll see over in the left-hand margin, there's not just a scale of 1 to 10, but +1 to +10 and -1 to -10. That is the best way to look at relationships. Now, as we look at our little guy here, you can see he's got as a matter of fact, the worst, we didn't even talk about right now, the worst progression, we talked about this last time, is the predatory relationship. Again, go back to SurvivorSupport.net, look at the podcast. So you see this little guy here. He is in a predatory relationship. That looks like that. Okay, the irresponsible, the emotionally irresponsible person is not just smiling, but look at the look on his face. He's deriving a sadistic sense of satisfaction over this. Now the question is, how does this start? How do you get to a point where someone is able to get to a point where they accept other people's responsibility? Well, I'm glad you asked that, because here is, I'm going to get rid of my picture for a moment. There we go. What I call the high cost of not having discernment. So we look at our little stick figure on the left. Everybody else on the right is looking at him. This is unfortunately the makings of and the beginning of where things go awry. So we have our little person on the left. He's carrying 2 knapsacks. Now the problem is, that's a problem because he has more than his responsibility that he is carrying. So he has somebody in his life that is already doing that to him. And this is actually gender neutral. So this could be husband and wife. This could be, and either one, my little stick figures are sort of gender neutral there. So in this relationship, the person on the left has begun to become what? Familiar with and used to. So here we'll do the gradations. So we go from unreasonable to unhealthy. Look at how many knapsacks we've got piling on here. There's the toxic one, and eventually you have the predatory. So how do you go from carrying 1 knapsack to having a bunch? Well, it starts little by little. And let me get rid of the predatory here. And it starts with a predisposition toward owning responsibility that is not yours. So unfortunately in life, there are a lot of people that have no problem offloading their responsibility onto somebody else, especially offloading their responsibility to do what is right, just, and fair. Eventually, what comes of this type of dynamic? Now you notice, look at the different colors of knapsacks. So we actually have only one of the same colors across the entire board here. Well, look at the little guys. We're going to assume our first guy here, if I can get his picture back up. Let's look at where he started. Okay, look at his color over on the left. That is his responsibility. But let's say he has somebody in his life. Look at that kind of olive green. And now that has been transferred. Okay, so now he's walking through life. Let's say that's at home. Or let's say that's at home. So he's now carrying somebody else's responsibility. This, of course, is what he looks like. Okay, so he's walking through life like that, and then he goes to work or he goes to some other context, and there he is. He's already carrying stuff he shouldn't, because we are never designed to let go of our responsibility. That is different than a burden. So what happens? Well, he meets, I bet he's going to church. Church is notorious for this, and don't get me started. So he goes to church, and everybody says, oh, look at him. He has a servant's heart. Yes, sir, you got a servant's heart. So what happens? Well, by the end of the service, somebody has said, oh, you know what, son? We're going to sign you up for all sorts of programs, and then he's got to come to an early morning Bible study, and then he goes to work, and somebody's dumped on him, and then he has his own extended family, and they've dumped on him. This could be Christmas, by the way. So we've got everybody being very happy with him, and meanwhile, what's going on? He is now experiencing a whole lot of stuff, and what might we call that? We call that stress. We have an extreme amount of stress, and it's just shy of a panic attack. Those of you that have experienced this kind of thing for a long period of time, you can relate when things get worse and worse and worse, and before you know it, what happens? You are ready to blow. So when you feel stressed, it's either due to past losses or what? Or boundaries. That you are carrying stuff you were never designed to carry, and then the majority of Christians are told, and others, that really what this is a burden. No, these are two very different things. Now what ends up happening is this little guy with all the knapsacks also sometimes goes through the valley of the shadow of death, goes through very difficult things, and that's not just physical. Okay? So he's handed a burden, and then he's got all these knapsacks. So the situation this little guy's got, first of all, he's walking into what? Eventually, that is a recipe for burnout. So you can see how all the mental health issues come from this dynamic, essentially. Now, we talked about what will set that up. When I meet with folks, let me switch picture. When I meet with folks, I'm going to remove my picture. Here's how, from ancient wisdom, the book of Proverbs and the book of Psalms, this is how it views us and views life. That we're going through life on a journey. Let me find our little journey people here. Anyways, we're on the path. There we are. And we are to find people, we are to have people in our lives that are emotionally responsible, that we stay on the path. Each person carries his responsibility. Now, there will be times that life gets difficult. And so what do? You notice these people have not, the gal here has not offloaded her responsibility. She is carrying her responsibility. He is helping. That is a healthy relationship. You can have other kind of contexts. That may be a parent-child. So there are, there's a number of different situations where everybody's carrying their responsibility, and it can look differently. But the one thing it doesn't look like is that you don't have somebody saddled with other people's responsibility to where everybody else is looking like that. So our little guy with the knapsacks feels like that. And if you stay like that for very long, what ends up happening? Where's my favorite picture? You will end up looking like, if I can bring it, everybody's taxi. Everybody's emotional. You ever feel like that? Okay, what is that? I'll tell you what that is. That is that. So here's a little piece of advice. Do not be like this. Okay? This is a guarantee recipe for what? For burnout. So if you are feeling burned out, there's something that's going on. And we looked at, again, looking at the idea of the path, The path is where we are doing what is right, just, and fair, and we're staying on the straight and narrow. But there are two things that will pull us off the path. That comes from 3,000 years ago, the book of Psalms, Psalm 139, verses 23 and 24. We've talked about that in the past. I'm now referencing it. Let's say we don't want to stay on this path. Why? Well, I don't know. Look at where it's going. It's going up and down. And look at the first dip. We don't know if that's going to go bad places. But also, let's say we can see that, you know what, if we just get off that path and we start taking a shortcut. And there's two ways that we can take matters into our own hands. The verse says this, "Search me, O God, and know my heart." So long before Freud, David came along and said, God, there's a part of me just beyond my reach. I can't get at it. We would say, Lord, help tweak my neurons. Help me know what's going on. How do I know there's something going on? Because I'm feeling like that. This little guy here, the one thing he can't do, but the one thing he needs more than anything is what? He needs to offload everything. No, he needs to still hold on to his responsibility, but he needs to get rid of those. Well, how do you do that? Especially when it came from all of those folks. This could be your family, by the way. Okay, so the only answer for this little guy is for him to begin to discern who gave him each of those and begin to give them back in a polite but firm way. Okay, so we are not designed to carry this. This is not biblical. This is not Christian. This is not loving. This is nice. And we already learned in one of the past podcasts, it is not godly to be nice. Why? Because this is where nice gets you. Now, the opposite is not true. You're not to be a mean, nasty person. That's not the option. But I'll tell you what happens. You stay in that high level of stress. Now, again, stress is simply an accumulation of emotions that will match other people's irresponsibility. So you're on the receiving end of it. But here's what's important to remember. You are not responsible for what you're given, but you are responsible for what you do with it. Now, what I would say is this. As far as you're not responsible for what you're given, ultimately, you kind of are responsible in this sense. This person over on the left is having a hard time doing what? Speaking the truth in love. They're not being honest. They're being nice, but they're not being honest. That's not godly. So they end up feeling guilty for what? For having their boundaries. And so they have a bunch of people that dump on them. And this could be after a church service, now that I think about it. This guy is so stressed, he would think, you know what? I'm not going to church anymore because look, I get all sorts of stuff dumped on me. Now, those amount of little knapsacks are akin to someone now taking matters into their own hands. Why? Because if you cannot be honest, you are fear-based. There's something that's preventing you from being honest with someone when they start to offload their responsibility on you. If you cannot be honest, what happens is this. You very quickly, on some level, try to figure it out. Anything but being honest. And so by doing that, you suck it up. And the moment you do that, and somebody gives you their responsibility, in a strange sort of way, you have rewritten Proverbs chapter 3, verses 5 and 6. 3,000 years ago, Solomon, the wisest man in the world, that died like a train wreck, though, so he didn't apply his own wisdom. It says this, trust in the Lord with all your heart. Don't lean on your own understanding, because sometimes people will think, you know what, we'll just do this. It'll be okay. I'll keep the peace. Really? What's your body telling you? What's your stress level telling you? Stress is an accumulation of emotions. Your body will feel this. So what happens is you stay in that state for very long, you will have a stress-related illness or a breakdown. Okay, so what happens is when you have a bunch of other people's knapsacks, you're taking yourself down the path of anxiety. You're getting off the straight and narrow, which says you need to be honest. It says do not be like this. So you need to give back other people's responsibility. If you find that you can't, the reason you can't is because you are fear-based. And so what's happened is instead of trusting the Lord with all your heart, you lean on your own understanding. meaning you're trying to figure it out. And so you take yourself off the path. Now you begin to wander down a different path, and it ends up in a desert. And it's progressive. And meanwhile, you're still carrying all the backpacks, and you're becoming dry in your soul. You are on the path of burnout. That's where good people end up. Now, we shouldn't, but in regular kind of counseling, this is typically what you see. So when people come in to see me, they look like this. Now, they don't come in looking like this, but under the surface, guess what? They are like this. And so my job as a therapist is to begin to help them discern what is or isn't theirs. And the goal of life and the goal of relationships is for everyone to look like that in terms of their relationship. Everybody carrying one knapsack, no more and no less. Now, what happens if somebody gets off on the other path, the other side of the path? Okay, the reason why someone would end up over there is the other half of Psalm 139, verses 23 and 24. Again, it says, "Search me, O God, and know my heart. Show me my anxious thoughts." So that has to do with how have I assumed responsibility that is not mine? Show me my anxious thoughts. So show me where I'm not able to have a voice. How I've taken matters into my own hands and I've got myself off the straight and narrow, the right path that God has designed for me, which is enough because I will then, again, be just carrying one knapsack. Okay, that's all we're designed to carry, and that's enough, as each of us know. But if I end up compromising, and again, there we go. So those two people are on the path. They're walking side by side, and that is an example of a respectful relationship. But if they cannot be honest, if one of them cannot be honest, they are ripe for being piled upon, and they'll go down the right side there, the path of anxiety. The other thing that will pull us off the path, again, Psalm 139, verses 23 and 24, search me, O God, and know my heart. Show me my anxious thoughts. How many knapsacks am I carrying? And my hurtful ways. Where does hurtfulness come from? Well, when I've been hurtful, I have been selfish. And selfishness comes from what? It comes from ego. So I've just put to rest the issue that hurt people hurt people. No, hurt people don't hurt people. Now, do we all have bad days every now and then? Of course. Do we have a tendency to be reactive? Of course. What do you do after that? We are not given permission to continue to be emotionally irresponsible because what is that? That's taking my knapsack and putting it on someone else. So the extent to which I've gotten comfortable with dumping on someone, giving them what they don't deserve, that means I'm feeling very comfortable taking my responsibility to do what is right, just, and fair, and now I'm dumping. So what happens is this. When the person starts to dump either just out of advantage or out of habit, you have the person that dumps, that's out of ego, and the person that receives it is out of fear. So in this case, the little knapsacks are reversed. Okay, so the path of life, the picture right here, shows the guy without a knapsack would be going to the left, the person with the knapsack going to the right. So you can actually begin to measure where people are at, and water will find its own level. And that's why oftentimes, as a relationship starts to become unhealthy, you're going to find there's our little person in an unhealthy relationship. He's got 3 knapsacks. You're going to find that there is just as much anxiety in terms of the person on the left as there is ego on the person on the right. And so we are looking at selfish people. Eventually, we will look at what goes on inside of us when we are fear-based. And that is important because as we start to interact with people that have a propensity toward giving over their responsibility, they start to go downhill. And we get to a point where we start to descend with them, and we're not supposed to. We're supposed to always work toward helping one another, move towards character development. Well, if I allow them to take me downhill, you see the dark red, that is both in terms of their character and including my anger, because the flip side of hurt is anger. But as far as discerning, you can see on the right there, I'll start to have clouded vision. I'll start to be living under an illusion that the person hurt people. And that's not. It is selfish people that hurt people. And then eventually I will become deluded and blinded because the selfish person wants to take me for a ride. They want to take me down into the fog. We looked at that last time. What is in the fog? Well, the fog is a place where the selfish person benefits. The fog conceals intentions. The fog is the place where my intuition starts to be dumbed down because the other person is dumbing it down. Meaning I start to have a difficult time discerning what is or isn't true. And that's all a selfish person needs to take me for a ride and to begin to offload and dump their responsibility on me. And we will look at what's the basis of that dynamic and what kinds of people, what are they able to do as they start to descend and take me with them? What are they able to do to me? And we will look at that on the other side of the break.
Are you or someone you know a survivor of abuse and wondering where to turn for trustworthy help and insight into the effects of such abuse? Ever wish you had access to a resource that could help you continue your progress in healing? SurvivorSupport.net is that resource. Developed by Jon Uhler, a seasoned therapist with years of experience working with sexual abuse survivors, SurvivorSupport.net is a one-of-a-kind resource to help you understand the impact of abuse and to help you understand the nature of those who harmed you in order to help you gain clarity and continue healing. If you are interested in speaking with Jon Uhler about your situation or in having Jon conduct a consultation or a training for your church or organization, SurvivorSupport.net serves as a convenient method of contacting him. Our program, Journey to Healing, is made possible through the generous donations of viewers like you. There are many opportunities and needs that Survivor Support is attempting to meet, and your monthly support or one-time gift would be extremely helpful as we seek to meet those needs and opportunities. Simply visit SurvivorSupport.net and you will see the link to donate on the homepage. We thank you.